Hang on.
Oh, no.
Sorry, you went live. My animals just started fighting.
Oh, you're fine.
We
Well,
can
I
keep
can edit
this.
this part. Yeah.
We can keep it in there if you like. It's totally up to
Yeah.
you. Just as you hit live, my cat swapped at my dog, and you could probably hear the hissing in the background. But I mean, if this is a podcast about me and my career, these guys are in it every stage. So it's up to you.
This is it. This is it. Awesome. Well, Sam, welcome to the podcast here. I appreciate you making some time today.
Okay, we need to send you a link. Let me kick these guys out. Sorry, Nick.
We'll let it run. I'll edit the beginning. They're really hissing.
As soon as the cat got on the table, it was like game over.
All right. Do this. All right. I think we're live. Sam, welcome to the podcast here.
Thanks for having me, Nick.
Super excited to talk today. I think this is our third time doing the introduction, so hopefully we'll get through this podcast together.
Absolutely.
But before we jump in, Sam, you know what we have to do? We have to tell people to subscribe. We have 166 subscribers. Let's make it 167. So if you're watching this on YouTube, LinkedIn, give us a thumbs up, give us a like, give us a subscribe.
Everybody has to smash that subscribe button when you turn it from 166 to 166,000, right, Nick?
Boom. Love it. Can't deny the accent. So, Sam, super excited to talk. You're a sales engineer by trade. You have a very interesting background, college swimmer. You have a funny accent coming from Australia. So I think I'd love to talk about today your career progression, how you came over to the States, and really deep dive into what is sales engineering, what does that mean, how do people break into it, all that kind of fun stuff here today. So Sam, if you want to give kind of an introduction, a little background on yourself, and then we'll jump into college swimming, I think, as a kind of the first start here, and then your time in audit, and from there we'll go there.
Perfect. No, absolutely. Happy to. So my family's British. I was born in the UK. My two younger brothers. And when we were young, my father left the Royal Air Force and joined the Australian Air Force. So that's how we ended up just north of Sydney. And that's how I ended up with this kind of very mongrel accent across two Commonwealth countries. Wearing black today, of course, because we lost our queen about 48 hours ago. So lived in Australia for most of my formative years, and that's where I picked up swimming. And now I'm heading very close to 30 and get out of breath climbing stairs. So certainly don't want anything. I'm still an impressive athlete, not even close. But a long time ago, I was a swimmer, and I swam competitively. I swam for the Australian junior team, and there was an Olympian by the name of Brett Hawke who was well known in the late 90s, early 2000s, so at the Sydney Olympics. He was the head coach of Auburn University in Alabama, and he reached out to me. I would have been about 17 at the time, just finishing up high school, and he just asked if I was curious about joining the NCAA program and going through the college athletics experience. Of course, big sell for college athletics is no student debt, which is very much a blessing. And I was very excited about the idea. And I asked him, I'd never heard of Auburn before. And I asked him, where's Auburn? And he said, well, it's in the state of Alabama. What do you know about Alabama? And I said to him, I was like, I've heard the song and I've seen Forrest Gump. Well, you're an expert, come on over. So I visited Auburn. I visited other schools. I ended up landing on Auburn and studied international business there while I swam, which, not to offend anyone who has an international business degree, but it's a sexy way to say I didn't do a lot in undergraduate, right? I dabbled in Spanish, pero mi español es muy malo. Whoever speaks Spanish knows that I just butchered that. Can't speak Spanish, is what I'm trying to say. But picked up a business degree, from a very good school, and then to stay competitive in the market, stayed at Auburn and got my MBA, which was kind of the educational differentiator that I picked up. So did that. Did that about 4.5 years. Finished swimming once I finished undergraduate, and then I I left. It was close to leaving university, resume in hand, young professional, ready to rock and roll in the world, and sending my resume to companies in Sydney and Melbourne back home, and sending my resume to companies in London, actually dual national, and they were like, "Yeah, cool. We're not, we typically hire from the University of Sydney and the School of Economics and Monash and the University of Melbourne. We're not really sure of this University of Auburn or your background." So they they gave me a few chances, but and I had a few opportunities, but nothing super competitive. And on the flip side, America, for those of you that are listening that are from foreign nations that live in the States, obviously there's the whole immigration, the visa process. So in the US, the case was, love your resume, love you, Sam, but you're expensive from an immigration perspective. So good luck. But I always wanted to work for a large consulting firm, and the Big Four are quite flexible with where you work in the world, because of course they are international schools, and so I ended up doing a lot of recruiting with the Big Four, the Big Four accounting firms. Ultimately landed at Ernst & Young, where I worked for your wife, Mr. Fuller.
Yeah. We'll talk about those difficult conversations when I recruited you over.
Good. Those were fun. Obviously, she taught me a lot about management and about IT risk and about the industry that I work in now, which we'll get into. And then I spent just shy of 4 years, about 3.5 years at EY. So for those of you who know, the Big Four system was kind of one of those senior consultants or senior advisors. We start to have a bit of supervisor responsibility, and you have a small team under you that reports to you. And you and some of your colleagues at the company I work for now, the software company, a long way to go, but very impressive product. And they were looking at automating a lot of my job, a lot of my work, and a lot of what we do as auditors and risk managers and advisors in the space I was working in. And so I thought to myself, well, it's time to make sure I'm on the right side of that automation and that innovation. And so I joined a software company out of Atlanta that specializes in governance, risk and compliance, and digital trust and privacy, which is obviously a lot of the things that the advisory groups at the Big Four do. Never look back. Fantastic move. And while of course people probably can tell by that background, not a formal technical background, a lot of what I did was very, very technical. A lot of technical professional certifications, and so fit right in and end up in that sales engineering role, and then managing a sales engineering team.
Yeah, I love that background. Thanks for that, Sam. And so when we think about, coming out of college, international business degree, you have that MBA, and you move into essentially an audit role.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk about, what audit is? What does that entail? And then we'll compare that to now on the software side,
Mm-hmm.
kind of on that pre-sale side where you're a sales engineering kind of senior manager today, and talk about some of the differences and how that translated over to your work today.
Yeah, absolutely. So audit is not super intuitive of a concept to folks that haven't worked in audit, right? Hopefully no one experiences an audit. If you experience an audit, you're probably talking to the IRS. It's probably not a fun time, right? But obviously it's not remotely limited to taxes and finances. There's a lot of different things you can audit. So that the core concept of audit is what we refer to as the third line of defense, right? So the first line of defense, this is not like an organizational hierarchy where you've got an analyst all the way through to a CEO. Rather, it's the first line is everybody that does the day-to-day business, from the analyst to the chief revenue officer to the chief executive officer, right? The second line of defense are individuals that are responsible for compliance and risk and security and protecting the business and making sure there are rules and processes in place for the first line, for the business, right, to make sure it survives. And then the third line is a really important but redundant by design group that checks the work of those checkers, right? They are that line of defense that goes in and they're typically going to have some level of independence, whether it's independent organizational reporting or in some cases completely external, like in the case of EY or more dramatically like the PCAOB or the SEC, and they'll come in and they'll check the processes of that company. And there's always going to be a particular scope, right? So the most pervasive style of audit that a lot of organizations are exposed to, especially the publicly traded, would be a financial audit of your financial statements to protect the shareholders, right? But it could be an audit of your supply chains. It could be an audit of your, if you're an aircraft, if you're an airline company, it could be an audit of your aircraft engines, right? It could to make sure that they are safe. It could be safety audits. It could be operational audits. It could be risk audits. The scope is very, very broad, but the core concept is the same every single time. So that third line defense, that redundant check of the processes and the protections that the company has put in place.
Yeah.
So, yeah, sorry.
And from there, you worked in kind of IT audit. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. So I would audit information systems. So if a particular piece of your IT ecosystem claimed it did something, or if a security team claimed they had this process in place, right, or this feature in place, or this encryption method in place, or this firewall in place, whatever it may be, it was the job of our team to do that redundant check on that. And the types of audits we would do would be periodic. And what's interesting is a lot of the second line of defense, that compliance and security group, as a lot of folks would know, is starting to become very, very automated. A lot of controls and processes now are settings and features and firewalls in your ecosystem. But audit continues to maintain a traditional human response to it. And there's a deeper item that is really interesting to explore about audit, especially information systems audit or IT audit, where when do you draw a line to say we trust the automation and the machines, right, to do the job? And today in 2022, we still don't. We still have a lot of money and a lot of funds, a lot of cost pouring into the human component of checking the machines, checking the automation to make sure it's actually doing what we thought we configured it to do. And so that was the bit I specialized in. And then, of course, there's lots of different laws and frameworks and scopes. So about 50% of my time, because I work for Ernst & Young, there's no secret that is a massive accounting firm. So about 50% of what I did was supporting financial audits. But of course, today, if you're auditing a financial statement, in 2022, 90% of that is automated computer systems. So while the traditional CPA, the traditional accountant, would be looking at the quote unquote books, you were in there making sure that all of the automation that created the said book, right, was actually in check.
Yeah, look at the systems that generate all the numbers and make sure the system is, secure and works properly, so they can trust the numbers that come out of it.
Exactly right. And then the other half of it was other types of information system audits, so security audits. One of the most interesting types of audits I would do would be media rating audits. So if you think of algorithms in Silicon Valley companies, that will either ensure that you're paid effectively on a streaming platform like YouTube based on the number of subscribers. And a reminder to smash that subscribe button here, right, is actually accurately producing value to the content creator. We used to audit those algorithms for different organizations. Brand safety was a really fascinating one, right? You don't want, if you've got a video about the invasion of Afghanistan, you don't want a Pampers commercial for diapers on that. Or if you have a video about guns, you don't want children's content being advertised on it. And companies care about that. So how were the algorithms making sure that certain commercials were appropriate for the content of the videos? Right. So that was another thing where, so information system audits is, just by those three examples, you can tell starts to be very, very broad as well. Core concept there is humans have created automation. Automation is running continuously. Humans don't quite trust it yet.
Yeah. It makes a lot of sense. So you spent 3.5 years kind of deep practitioner, building kind of that skill set, understanding of what goes into an audit, what is a control, what are these different frameworks and things like NIST and ISO, and just really immersed in that space. And then, some of our mutual friends from the software company probably reached out, or you reached out and looking for a change of pace. And so from there, you moved from kind of practitioner of audit to implementing technology that supports, GRC or vendor risk management programs. Can you talk about what that transition looked like from a practitioner to implementation consultant? Because kind of different point of view, different goals than what you were used to.
Yeah, absolutely. So, when I think about, so I'll kind of break this down two parts, right? The reason for the move and then the experience of the move. So when I joined EY, I was super hungry, super excited. I had a bit of an imposter syndrome, right? Because it was the top business students and accounting students with 4.0s and high GPAs for the most part, and then there was me. Right, so I was really scrappy, and I picked up everything. I worked really long hours. I was really hungry, and I really looked up to the partners and the principals of the firm. Right? And to this day, I look at some of the executives of big four firms as some of the most polished professionals that are in the industry. And I wasn't looking to leave. I got married in towards the end of my time at Ernst & Young, and I think big emotional and big life events shift your perspective. And I remember it was very coincidental. I got back from my honeymoon. I was driving to a client site to get back stuck into work. I wasn't, for the first time, it's going to make me sound like a little bit of a nerd, but the first time I wasn't really hungry and excited about what I was going to do. It's kind of oh, okay, that magic's over. And I was sitting silently, no radio on the car, kind of driving to work. And on the very same day, one of the recruiters at OneTrust, the software company I work for now, reached out and just explained a few concepts that I work in every single day, and said, we're looking to innovate and automate this. And I don't know how superstitious you are, Nick, and I don't know if you've been signed or anything like that, but I was like, well, this is at the very least a massive coincidence. And so I explored it, right? You do get a lot of recruiting traffic when you work for the Big Four, and then you politely say thank you, but I'm happy, or you ignore the noise. And it was the first time I engaged, and once I started to explore what OneTrust was doing, what obviously our colleagues were doing at the time, we got very excited about it. And I mentioned, kind of, I was describing audit, right? We still don't trust the machines, and we are still using human interfaces and human beings to check those machines. What OneTrust does is it provides a software platform for what we refer to as digital trust. So it's not just the IT audits that we're talking about, but governance, risk, and compliance from an IT perspective, privacy perspective, third-party perspective, environmental and sustainability and ethics perspective. So we're pressing the envelope on where that line is, and what automation, what software can do to create that trust in your organization versus what humans are able to do, right? So humans can do more value-add proposition within your organization. And that was an incredibly exciting idea. So that's why I moved over to OneTrust and didn't look back. It's been a fantastic time. The transition, as you can imagine, being an information systems auditor, you do get very technical very quick. It was a bit of baptism by fire. I came out with as a business student. They just wanted to do PowerPoint presentations and talk in a boardroom, right? And then turns out no one cares, and that's not very valuable if you can't back it up with any skill sets, right? And so I did get quite technical through my time at EY. So the transition wasn't too dramatic to then go to a software company, luckily. And it was a perfect fit because the business context and the business subject matter was in line with what Ernst & Young does. And just by sheer force of the industry I was in, I'd gone quite technical. I'm not a software developer. I wouldn't be able to sit there and write lines of JavaScript or lines of HTML or lines of C++. I can read it, I understand it, and I can set up the basics, set up APIs, that kind of thing. So I was able to go in understanding that. So that was helpful. And you know this, right? I signed up to be in a consulting role, like an implementation consulting role, and kind of was getting coached to lead a small team in the consulting group. And 6 weeks in, I kind of explored the world of a sales engineer and living on that pre-sales side. And that was a nice fit because that would have kind of incorporated a lot of the revenue and business and finance areas of my education and my interest that I didn't really get to wet the tongue, so to speak, in that area, being in IT audit. And so the marriage of the three concepts, revenue and sales, technical, and then GRC coming together as an SC, I applied and moved into the sales engineering role way too quickly. Probably too quickly, considering I signed up for a different role. I was like, just immediately like, yeah, that, I want to do that.
Yeah, that's one of the beauties of a startup. You can move quickly, change roles, and
Absolutely.
support the business where it needs to be supported.
Yeah.
So Sam, I think this is a great point to kind of talk about what is sales engineering, what is the practice of it,
Yeah.
What do people think it is versus what it actually is, and then we'll dig a little deeper there.
Yeah. So I'll preface this by saying, if you think about how long sales engineering has been around, right? Not that long in the grand scheme of careers, right? Accountants, lawyers, doctors, police officers, firefighters, right? There's centuries of data behind it, right? Even a software developer, the first true computer was created in the 40s, I think was the time period. The concept of sales engineer, at least in terms of mature role and not just kind of a hybrid role, it's probably only about 20 years old, I would say. So a lot of organizations take very, very different approaches to what an SE is, like what a solutions engineer or sales engineer is. So I want to preface that by saying that you might be in an organization, or my experience in organizations is very dramatically different to what I described. But for the kind of commonalities across majority of companies is that if you are selling to an organization or to a particular company and you're selling a technical product, typically you need two skill sets. You need a traditional account executive or a traditional sales rep that really understands the legal and procurement aspects of what that deal looks like, which is an entire trade and an entire set of skill sets in its own right. But it's very rare. I do know individuals that fit into this gap, and there's some of the most impressive individuals I've worked with. But it's very rare for that skill set to marry well with the level of technical expertise that the evaluation needs to go to in order to make the business, whether it's a small mom and pop shop or you're selling to Coca-Cola or Google, right? Those organizations need comfort that the tech is going to work, that you've proved the concept, and that's where the sales engineer comes into play. And so this, what I'm about to say, kind of falls within a spectrum. The sales engineer, if you just deploy software engineers, typically speaking, they don't have that sales literacy. If you deploy a sales rep, as I explained, they typically don't have that technical literacy. So you have to create a professional role that has the ability to speak to and balance both. Now, depending on the business, depends on how far across the spectrum that you go. At OneTrust, we're kind of in the middle, right? Like the team that I manage, we have some really technical folks that are able to deploy worker nodes and build APIs and script out capabilities. We've got folks that can do that to a more basic level, more repetitive level. And then we've got folks that really are subject matter expertise that still need to be technically proficient and able to speak to the tech, but maybe don't have to do as much of the hands-on building of the tech, right? And so I definitely have worked with or know businesses where the SE, and sometimes at this point they're called solution consultants, really aren't technical at all. But you need expertise in specific business subject matter areas that the account executive may or the sales rep may not be able to be proficient in, all the way through to some organizations that provide like edge computing or an option of cloud versus on-prem capabilities, like for like a cloud SaaS company, or a very specific security company that does a very specific deployment, like an Okta or an Nessus Tenable. They're going to have way more technical individuals, where the subject matter expertise is fairly similar, right? It's going to be certain security concepts. A CISP is probably going to cut it. The security certification, and they can hone in on a lot more of the technical. So very much a spectrum. We fall somewhere in the middle, I would say, in the spectrum of sales engineers. But that's the concept and that's the skill set that is necessary, and the why behind that profession.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. It kind of, I think, leans itself to who your buyer is and what are you selling. Because you need someone who's super deep in kind of the subject matter that you're trying to sell into. So if you're talking to a security person, they want to have a peer-to-peer conversation about, great, you have software, but how does that help me in my role and in these nuances of what I'm trying to solve for?
Yeah.
And sometimes, an account executive, they understand that, but they didn't do that work, right? That wasn't their career typically beforehand. They're sales folks, so they can sell anything, but they didn't live and breathe in that security world before. So being able to bridge that gap between, hey, this is your pain point, and then I know exactly how the tool can help solve for that, or the product, service, whatever's being sold, kind of marrying those two conversations is really where I see a lot of successful SEs live.
Absolutely.
And then if it's a very technical product and you're selling to engineers, you probably need a more engineering focused kind of salesperson or sales engineer to have those deep technical conversations, to make sure you're speaking to the right buyer. Would you say that's kind of like a good assessment?
Absolutely. And a successful sales engineering or solution engineering organization, you think about it holistically across the company, will often have groups or teams or pods of both of those lines or areas of the spectrum. And you'll often see, depending on the product, larger of those dev engineering groups versus larger of those more sales and business acumen groups, depending on, again, what they might be selling at the time.
Yeah, no, makes total sense. And so, Sam, when we think about like a sales engineer, what's the day-to-day look like? What are you doing? How, what is the activities? What do you get measured on? How do you measure your team?
Yeah, so I'll speak to it more holistically, because my day-to-day now has shifted in the last couple of years. Just because I'm in a people management role, and we can get in that if you'd like, Nick, a little bit later. But to me, that is not a completely separate trade or skill set, but a fundamentally different one with a fundamentally different set of day-to-days, which is an important distinction there. But for my team, what I did when I first started the sales engineering role, the day is going to be broken down into three key areas. There's going to be business development areas. There's going to be sales, customer-facing conversations and calls and on-sites, and then training. So what is fascinating about sales engineering role is that, just given the space that they're deployed into, they really do become a central team to the entire business. If you think of a traditional software organization, you're typically going to have a product team that's often broken up between like product designers and developers and engineers. You're typically going to have a sales team. You'll have the internal business functions like your legal, compliance, and HR. And then sometimes, depending on how the company's structured, you may also have like an implementation or consulting team. Depending on software companies, some aggressively use third parties for that. Some aggressively keep it internally, everything in between. Yeah. But regardless, the sales engineer is exposed to all these different market trends on a day-to-day basis and has to have the effective communication and communication methods between these different groups, the traditional sales reps, product, consultant, if the company has that division. And so you'll be on the phone or on site. That was more common pre-pandemic, as you can imagine, in the functional tool that you're selling, and typically you'll build and design your use cases before you present to the customer. I hope every single time, otherwise that's always a complete fire drill and not a good plan. You'll be presenting your particular product to the customer. That's going to take about 60 to 70% of your time during the day. And you're going to be presented certain challenges from certain companies, and you become the problem solver. And sometimes you have to take the triangle-shaped problem from the customer and work out how that can fit into the square hole, because you're there to provide value both to the customer and also to win a sale and provide revenue to your organization. And that's a very, very important balance to make. You want to be ethical and honest and make sure it's a successful relationship across the entire life cycle of your business relationship with that customer. But you also don't want to, every single time a problem comes up, going, that's not the exact problem we always solve for, so no, Mr. Customer, we're not going to go forward with that, right? So there's a lot of problem solving and a lot of creation involved in that. So you'll be on the phone a lot. or on the on-sites, and you'll also be then behind the scenes building, developing what you've been tasked to create, both before and then after, when there's new concepts that are presented live as you go through your presentation of the software. That's about 67% of the time. About 20 to 30% of the time, you're going to be taking what you've learned and either explaining it to the consulting teams, whether it's a Grant Thornton or an Ernst & Young or a Protiviti that's deploying it, or your own internal consulting teams, to make sure that what you prove the concept on is going to be successful and transitioned effectively to the group that then actually has to turn your ideas into a reality.
Right.
And in an effective SE organization, you should be on the hook for the things that you said we could do, right? And then 10% of it is training, because you are the face of the company. You have to be one of, if not the most polished group in the organization. And you cannot be caught off guard by new market trends, by new initiatives, especially in my space, when you think about governance, risk and compliance, and privacy and legal compliance and legislative updates associated to those, right? I mean, you lose trust immediately if you're not up to speed with the latest tech and the latest business environment and compliance environments that you're operating in. So training. We spend, at my organization, we spend a lot of time and money, of course, is what that computes to, ensuring that these guys are the best of the best when they're presenting in front of a team. And we'll switch between subject matter and presentations and sales prowess and the softer skills. How do you make sure that you are presenting the product in a way that is talking value, not just function? This is how things work versus this is how this provides value to your organization. That is something that we train a lot and we redundantly repeat. And then, of course, it's the rest of the content is updates to, if you take the security space, PCI is coming out with 4.0 version. ISO is coming out with their 2022 revisions. You need to be an expert in those. You need to be an expert in those yesterday. So there's 67% sales, 20-30% in internal business development with the other teams, 10% training. That's going to break down. You asked week. I think I answered. So you asked, what's the day look like? I think I answered in a week, but that's the breakdown of what a sales engineer will typically do.
Yeah, I love that. And Sam, I have a mini video that went viral-ish for me, a few thousand views on what is a sales engineer, and so many comments are, how do you break into it? How do I become a sales engineer? So can you talk about maybe what are traditional paths to moving into a sales engineering role? What do you look for someone who wants to become a sales engineer, and what are those qualities?
Yeah, absolutely. So traditional paths are going to be either coming from a dev engineering background or coming from a consulting background. Right? If I look at the span of sales engineers that we have in our organization, or if I look at the span of sales engineers from other organizations that we work closely with, they consistently fall within those two buckets. Now, I don't want to discourage anyone that doesn't fall into those two backgrounds. Because one, I just said consultant, that's one of the vaguest terms on the planet, right? So it's going to be a consultant in the particular industry or problem that the software is solving, right? So just to give a definition on consultant. The reason that we come from those two groups is because of that balance, that technical balance to that business balance. And so I'm trying to think, I don't think I've ever hired someone for my team when I work with our recruiting groups who has nailed both. What we do is we look for someone that has nailed one of those and is coachable.
Yep.
So if you're a developer that has fantastic presentation skills, is hungry to learn, and is humble to know that they don't understand that other side, perfect fit. And on the flip side, if you're an auditor or an IT consultant or an implementation consultant, or let's say your software is it's Workday, right? And it's an HR system, right? If you've got a career in HR and you can't be technically illiterate, right? But you have some level of technical expertise, nowhere near coding and scripting and developing, And again, you tick those boxes of humble on what you don't know on the technical side, and hungry to learn and have that good presentation skill. Again, fantastic fit. And so, part of my job as a people manager is to fill the gaps. So as we bring new sales engineers into the organization, or we move sales engineers in their careers into areas that they're interested in, my job is to find the kind of what's the equitable path for every single individual SE, what their weaknesses are and how we fill those weaknesses in. Because every single one of us is going to have those major weaknesses in one area, and that's what we're going to have to coach on and train on. So yeah, it's there's not many careers where it's or job descriptions where it's okay to have a massive weakness in one area or the other, because that is the reality of the job market, is that is who you're up against, and we want those expertise. That's what we desperately need.
Yeah. And what are the common traits that you want to see for? So you talked about being humble, knowing what where they lack knowledge, and hungry to learn. But you also mentioned excellent presentation skills. This is a fully customer-facing role. So if you're an amazing engineer, but you don't like talking to people, this is not going to be a good fit, right?
Yeah. And I think if you're moving to the sales engineering role because you're running away from something, like you're done with consulting, right? For whatever reason, maybe you've done it too long and you're bored of it, or you're just looking for a change in life. Or on the flip side, if you're a developer and you're looking to get away from your computer screen, you're looking to get away from the code and getting away from the deep dives of infrastructure, this is not a role for you. And I think that's probably a universal comment to make, quite frankly. If you're running away from something, not running towards something, whatever that something is, it is not going to make you happy, right? It's going to be the grass is always greener on the other side syndrome, right? So that's a really, really important thing to think about when you're considering sales engineering. To your point, Nick, right? So my team, I'm so proud of them. They're one of the most fantastic groups of people that I've had the honor of managing, not leading. They run circles around me, just managing. I'm an admin, right? And some of them are really young. Some of them are a couple of years out of college too. And they're having conversations with CISOs of Fortune 500 companies and keeping up with them.
Yeah.
And sometimes running circles around them. And so that is a high pressure situation. And so not only do you need to be able to present well, you need to be able to be comfortable being outside of your comfort zone. Sounds like an oxymoron, but the reality is that when you make mistakes, it'll cost very tangible revenue. So the highs are high and the lows are low. You make mistakes in the cost centers of a business. Let's say you're an accountant, you're working in an internal corporate accounting firm. You make a mistake, there's a lot of other divisions that roll up to how much that mistake cost, and it's hard to pinpoint. Then that moment, this mistake cost us this dollars. If you blow a demo, if you blow a proof of concept, which you will in your career, there's a dollar sign that says that cost. Sam screwed up that call, and that cost us $150,000 US. That's hard. That's a high pressure situation. But of course, if you nail that demo, you nail that proof of concept, that call made us $150,000. So the highs are really high and the lows are low, and you need to have the mental wherewithal to be able to be ready for that roller coaster, because you're going to make mistakes. If you go thinking, yeah, no, I'm going to be the guy that nails every single proof of concept, you're going to be sadly mistaken.
Yeah, tough reality.
Exactly. So mental fortitude, being humble in what you don't know, and having excellent presentation skills are some of the most critical soft skills that you need to come into this job with.
Yeah, love it, man. So I think we're coming up on time here. What are some of the other kind of, maybe some top tips if someone's trying to break into sales engineering? What should they look to do? How should they network? What should that look like for them?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you're trying to break into sales engineering on a more macro level, you'll probably trying to break into a software company, or you're already working for a software company and you're looking to move divisions, right? So I'll take it in two parts. If you're looking to break into the tech space, which in the USA is one of the most amazing industries to work for, and it's why my wife and I, one of the reasons why we live in the US. Then you definitely want to start to get a little bit more literate, but not necessarily the tech. I'm not telling everyone to go out and get coding certifications in a certain language. Rather, get familiar with what the trends are and what the problems are that certain softwares that you're interested in are trying to solve. That's critical, because these companies are going to have lines out the door of developers that have done their CS degrees, computer science degrees, and their engineering degrees, and then they're developers, right? That's not the world you're trying to get into. So that's the first step. And then, of course, like with any job, network into the companies and into the industries that you're looking to work for. And also be ready to work for perhaps companies and softwares that you're not passionate about to get your foot in the door as well.
Yeah.
Right. You might want to go work for a digital trust company. But if you have no software experience or no industry experience, maybe you need to start out in that planning, that small planning system, just to get your feet wet. That's okay, right? And then for those that are trying to break out, that are already in the software industry, it's making sure that you're starting to get familiar and starting to get literate in one of those two sides that you're not good at, right? So if you're a consultant and you're nailing the business propositions, well, if you go in completely literate, if I say, right, tell me about your familiarity with REST state and SOAP state APIs, and you go, I don't know what that is, that's a problem, right? Yeah. And again, versus write it, you don't need to know that, right? Get familiar with some of the technical language and some of the technical infrastructure you're trying to get into. And on the development side, you probably have the luxury of sitting there just worrying about exactly how to structure different deployments, maybe your software development life cycles. Maybe you're really in the fundamentals and you're building lines of code, which isn't really common in 2022. Code builds code these days. But anyway, well, have you really understood and really started to get your feet wet in the business propositions and the market trends that the technical work that you've been doing is solving for? So to summarize, if you're trying to get into the software space, networking and get understanding the software market. If you're already in the software space, making sure you're filling the gap on whichever side of the aisle you're weakest in.
Yeah, love that. So Sam, to wrap up here, can you talk about your keto belt and your hobby there?
Yeah, absolutely. So my wife and I, we do a martial art, Korean Hapkido. And so Hapkido is you can describe it as a mixed martial art. And depending on what gym you go to, it could be different techniques. As long as they follow the principles of non-resistance, the water principle, and the circular principle. And the idea behind it is that it's a self-defense art, and your assailant or your opponent, maybe bigger than you, maybe stronger than you, more energy than you. You use that movement against them. So if they strike, you move in the air. You're able to move your defensive blocks or your kicks or your counter strikes in a way that also incorporates the energy of that initial attack or that strike. It's a lot of fun. It's a great stress reliever. I was in a scenario. I won't go into detail about it. I don't want to close on a low note or a scary note. But I was in a scenario a few years ago that warranted self-defense knowledge, and I had absolutely no idea what to do. And so that was kind of a bit of a glass shattering moment where it's like, okay, I probably need to work out how to defend myself. I'm now a husband. My wife and I plan in the future. I won't put a timeline on it because my wife will be very annoyed with me. But we plan to be a mother and father one day, right? And so we have a lot of people that are important to us that we want to protect. So that's why I got into it, and it's also just a fantastic workout. I was that classic, 21st century 20-something-year-old just in the gym, right? I'm just going to lift heavy things all day, every day, and then I'm going to have scoops of protein, and that's going to be my workout. And that gets really, really boring really, really quick, right? So keto is also a lot of work, right? It's striking, it's kicking, it's grappling. So there's a lot of boxing principles, like Brazilian jiu-jitsu style grappling principles. It kicks your butt, and it's fun, and it's engaging, and it's also, because my wife does it with me, time at the end of the day to do something fun with her and spend time with her. So yeah, it's fantastic. To your point, I have a green belt. We're still very, very beginner rank. We've been doing it for, it's coming up in a couple of years now. And yeah, we're just going through the motions, and it's a fantastic little hobby on the side.
Love it, man. So good to have you on the show today. I learned a ton about sales engineering. I hope everyone who listened did as well. I think I have a good feeling about this, Sam. If I nail this thumbnail, if I nail this title, this will be the #1 video.
We'll explode it. Yeah.
Yeah. So Sam, where can people find you?
Where can people find me?
Yep.
So feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm not a big personal social media user. So I have an Instagram, I have a Facebook. I think the last post on Instagram was a photo from my wedding, and I wrote on it "more to come." That was like 4 years ago, and then nothing else was posted. So
what a teaser.
Yeah. So if anyone's got any questions, you can find me, Samuel Parker. I work at OneTrust, which is based in Atlanta. Please feel free to reach out to me via that medium, via direct message. More than happy to answer any of your questions that you may have around this space that we talked about today, or keto, if you want to talk about that as well. So that's probably the best medium to get a hold of me.
Awesome. Well, if you reach out, let me know. If you have questions, leave them in the comments. I'll make sure Sam answers all those questions. This was such a fun chat, Sam. So glad we got to connect here. We've been friends for a long time, but good to kind of get the full story and understand more about what you do day to day. So for anyone who made it this far, please give us a like, subscribe for more of this type of content, and we'll see you on the next one. Thanks, Sam.
All right. Thank you, Nick.